It is said that within the marble silence of forgotten halls, there lingers a library whose shelves were not made for the living alone. The stones of its walls breathe with stillness, their cool touch echoing centuries of unbroken vigil. In that space, where candlelight once flickered across rows of parchment and vellum, there remains a hush so deep it feels almost sacred. Dust lies heavy on the air, like a veil woven from centuries, softening every surface, muting every sound. Here, scrolls once kissed by firelight sleep in quiet darkness, their ink fading into whispers too faint for the eye, but not too faint for the soul. We begin with a question, one that drifts like incense through these corridors of stone. What words were so dangerous, so heavy with hidden meaning, that they had to be concealed in shadow? What secrets were written down not for the world to know, but for the world to forget? The air seems to move gently here, as though carrying the sighs of scholars who once bent their backs over open pages, writing by the tremble of flame. Some believe those scholars never truly left. Their voices dissolved into the walls, their breath folded into the bindings of books. In the hush, the living and the dead are indistinguishable, both reduced to silence, both waiting to be remembered. Beneath the visible library, whispers tell us, there lies another, a shadowed archive of forbidden scripts. Doors lead downward into darkness, corridors twisting like forgotten prayers. There are symbols carved into stone lintels, warnings etched in languages now unreadable. To enter is to trespass against time itself. Yet legends claim that below these silent shelves lies the heart of all memory, a place where the world hid what it could not bear to carry in the light. It is said that these hidden pages spoke of stars before the stars themselves had names. They carried maps of rivers long before their waters first broke through the earth. They chronicled truths that made kings uneasy, truths that unstitched the fragile seams of power. To hold such a page was to hold a fragment of eternity, too vast for mortal eyes. Imagine walking deeper into this underworld of silence. The corridor narrows, the torch sputters. The dust stirs and spirals, as though remembering footsteps that passed here long ago. You reach out to touch a binding, and it crumbles beneath your hand like ash. The ink rises in a faint breath, almost a sigh, as though the words themselves resist being touched. Some stories say that these books were alive. Not alive as flesh, but alive as silence is alive. Pulsing, breathing, waiting. Monks and mystics spoke of hearing faint murmurs, like waves on a distant shore, when they pressed their ears against the shelves. The more one listened, the less one remembered of the world above. Hours could dissolve into days, and days into years, until the seeker themselves became a part of the silence. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not the knowledge hidden here, but the reason it was hidden. Did these words hold danger? Did they threaten to unravel kingdoms, faiths, or the fragile sleep of humankind? Or were they simply too beautiful, too infinite, to be entrusted to the restless noise of life? Some believe the books contained languages that no longer exist, words spoken not by men but by stars, rivers, winds, a lexicon of creation itself. Others claim that the shelves held maps to places that lie not on the earth, but in the folds of the spirit libraries of dream, cities of shadow, sanctuaries between one breath and the next. To read them was not to travel through space, but through silence, to step beyond the veil where memory itself is kept. Imagine, then, the breath of 1,000 forgotten prayers rising like incense in the darkness. Each page a vessel, each letter a silent chant. Some were written by hands trembling not with fear, but with awe. Others were copied by scribes who did not understand the meaning, only that they must not let it vanish. Together, they built a labyrinth of ashen pages, a sanctuary where knowledge itself could hide. And yet, like all things bound to time, the bindings weakened, the ink faded, the dust deepened. The scholars vanished into shadow. The prayers grew quieter, until only echoes remained. Still, the weight of their silence lingers. It clings to the stone, to the air, to the heart of anyone who dares to listen. Whispers tell us of seekers who tried to find this place, travelers who followed fragments of maps, hints in crumbling letters, footsteps left in stories. Some claimed they reached it, only to emerge with eyes veiled in shadow, speaking in tongues that made no sense. Others never returned at all. The silence, it seems, does not release what it has chosen to hold. And so, the library beneath the library remains. Not entirely gone, not entirely present. A threshold between memory and forgetting. Perhaps it was never meant to be uncovered, only to remain in dream. Perhaps the greatest book is not the one we can open, but the one that remains forever closed. The marble silence deepens, the candle burns low, and we are left with the haunting thought that the most sacred truths are not those that survive, but those that are sealed by time's gentle cruelty. Even now, if you listen closely, if you quiet your breath, soften your heart, surrender to the hush, you may hear them. Not words, not phrases, but something older. A murmur, a rustle, the soft turning of an invisible page. A reminder that beneath the silence, the story still waits. And so we drift away, carried not by certainty but by wonder. Perhaps the whisper of ashen pages is not meant to be understood, but to remind us of the sacred beauty of what lies beyond reach. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some books are written not to be read, but to remind us of silence. And silence, like sleep, is its own kind of story. It is said that in forgotten valleys, where the wind moves like a low hymn and the stones drink the light of the moon, there rests the ruins of a chamber built by hands whose names no tongue remembers. Its pillars stand half-buried in the earth, their once polished faces eroded into whispers. At first glance, they seem unfinished, abandoned mid-gesture, as though the builders had simply vanished in the middle of their sacred labor. Yet the silence that enfolds them is not the silence of neglect. It is a silence that feels deliberate, reverent, as if the very air around these stones carries a vow. We begin with an image, the faint outline of arches curving upward but never meeting, their paths arrested in mid-air. The moon passes overhead, and shadows paint them as if they are completed, bridges of light reaching into eternity. Beneath this quiet spectacle, myths linger. Some whisper that the architects who shaped this chamber were not craftsmen of kings, but servants of eternity itself. They built not to house empires or coronations, but to hold an idea too vast for human completion. The journey deepens as we walk among the stones, tracing with our fingers the faint grooves of chisel marks. The touch is like running one's hand over memory itself. Rough, uneven, yet intimate. The walls tell no story directly, but the patterns suggest a rhythm, as if echoing an invisible design that once shimmered in the sky. Some believe these builders followed constellations, each curve an imitation of starlight, each angle a shadow of celestial order. Others say the structure was modeled after silence itself, an attempt to give form to the formless, to carve stillness into stone. It is said the chamber was never completed because it was never meant to be. The unfinished arches are not a failure, but a message that perfection exists only in the unseen. What remains is an eternal threshold, a doorway without a door, a hall without an end. The architects, in leaving it incomplete, may have been teaching us something only silence can hold, that completion is not always the destiny of creation. As the night deepens, one can imagine the builders themselves. They would gather in twilight, tools in hand, their faces turned upward to the heavens. Perhaps they whispered prayers not for strength of body, but for clarity of vision. Perhaps they sang songs to guide the rhythm of their hands, each strike of the chisel a syllable in an eternal hymn. The sound would rise into the air, mingle with the wind, then fall back into the earth. And when they were gone, what lingered was not their labor, but the silence that followed. Some legends tell of pilgrims who stumbled upon the chamber centuries later. They spoke of hearing faint music when they sat among the stones, music not carried by air but by the heart itself. Others swore that if one closed their eyes at the center of the chamber, one would feel an ascent, not upward, not outward, but inward, as though climbing invisible steps within the self. A staircase of silence, carved not by stone but by breath. The contradiction of this place lies heavy. It is both ruin and vision, both abandoned and eternal. The arches that lead nowhere also lead everywhere, for they point toward what cannot be seen. In this chamber, absence becomes presence, incompletion becomes perfection, and silence becomes its own kind of sound. Whispers tell us that the architects vanished without record. No graves, no tools, no remnants of daily life were found. Only the stones remain, carrying the weight of unfinished intention. Some say they were taken by the gods they served, their bodies dissolved into starlight. Others believe they left deliberately, knowing that to finish their work would be to betray its purpose. Whatever the truth, their silence speaks louder than any inscription could. And so the chamber rests. Its stones are kissed by moonlight, its shadows deepen with each passing night, and the wind continues its low hymn. Travelers who arrive here find themselves speaking in whispers without knowing why, as though raising their voice might disturb something fragile. The ruins do not ask for reverence, they create it. Perhaps the architects wish to show us that eternity cannot be captured. Perhaps they wish to remind us that human hands, no matter how skilled, can only gesture toward infinity, never seize it. Or perhaps they built this chamber not for us at all, but for silence itself. A dwelling place for the unsayable, a cathedral for breath. In the end, the stones do not explain. They remain as they are, unfinished, unwavering, unbroken by time's cruelty. The arches stretch upward, stopping just before they meet, as if inviting the heavens to complete what human hands could not. And the silence grows deeper, as though the chamber is still building itself in ways unseen. We leave with no conclusion, only a soft wonder. The chamber does not give answers. It gives questions that fold upon themselves like shadows at dusk. Perhaps perfection was never meant to be finished. Perhaps some designs live only in the pause between stone and starlight. And perhaps the chamber of silent architects is not incomplete at all, but whole in the only way eternity allows. It is said that in a hall where light moved like breath across old wood, there lay a map that no cartographer would claim and no sailor would carry. Its vellum was thin as a moth wing, its edges burned into soft, dark petals, as though the paper had once met a candle's secret and learned to keep it. The ink was the color of dusk after rain, and the lines upon it drifted between certainty and mist. At first glance, it seemed to record a coastline that never held the ocean, rivers that began in silence and ended in air, mountains sketched like sleeping shoulders beneath a celestial sheet. When one leaned closer, the map grew quieter, as if it waited for the watcher to slow, to match its ancient pulse. We begin with an image, a table of stone, cool under the hand, and on it the map, star-marked, veiled, a pale field with constellations of points that would not stay still. A lantern hums low. The room smells of dust and lemon oil, of binding twine and old leather, of rain gone soft. The window is open to the night, and a moth circles the lamplight as though tracing its own pilgrimage. Beneath the silence, a question rises like a tide without wind. What land, what memory, what spirit did these lines mean to hold? Whispers tell us the map was found rolled inside a tube of cedar, sealed with wax and ash, marked by the moon. A scholar of forgotten geographies opened it by the breath of a single candle. It is said that the candle shook, though no door opened, and for a moment the ink appeared wet, as if the map were remembering itself. Some believe it was drawn by hands that had walked the edge of things, shorelines between sleep and waking, thresholds where one world folds into the next. Others say the map had no maker. It gathered itself the way frost gathers on a window, by the quiet attention of night. To trace it was to drift, the rivers first, thin silver threads like veins of an unseen creature. They wandered into spirals, doubled back, and dissolved into fields of stippled dots that looked like sand or stars or the breath of prayer. Names hovered near them, but the names did not sound like language. They sounded like echoes, soft, oceanic syllables that could not be said without the tongue becoming still. Beneath one river, barely legible, a faded symbol, a key with no teeth. Beside a mountain line, a gate drawn in profile, ajar. Far in the corner, a small square. An empty room sketched in a single stroke, the door on the wrong wall. Some believe the map did not mark places at all. It marked the memory of places, the sensation of arriving, the hush before crossing a threshold, the salt on the mouth of someone who has listened long to the sea. The scholar, moving a fingertip along the ink, felt the oddest impression, that the line was not under the hand, but under the heart. Where memory fades, the map brightened. Where memory sharpened, the ink paled, as if it guided not the body but attention, not the foot but breath. There were faint compass roses, but each pointed differently. One leaned toward a darkened window. One pointed inward into the fold of the map itself. One carried a tiny star at its center rather than a needle, and the star was slightly smudged, as though someone had touched it with reverence. The scholar marked a note in the margins. Orientation variable, as if responding to the reader. Then, as if the map were listening, the nearest river shifted a hair's width and the marginal note looked suddenly too loud. Legend told of travelers who followed this chart. None spoke of ships or caravans. They spoke of nights in which doorways opened wider than before, of walls that yielded to the hand, of paths between trees that knew one's name. One tale, only half remembered, told of a novice monk who laid the map on the floor of an empty cloister and aligned its edge with the cold line of moonlight. The cloister's garden, enclosed and still, began to murmur like a harbor. He stepped forward, and the stone changed beneath his feet to a wooden plank that swung softly with the tide. When dawn came, they found him kneeling on the flagstones, eyes full of starlight, palm bearing the imprint of a rope. He never learned the rope's name. Beneath the silence of the old room, the map throbbed with small refusals. It refused to remain one thing. Looked at from the door, it was a coastline. From the far wall, a spinal column of hills. From the chair, a library plan. Shelves, alcoves, a staircase that coiled and then went missing. When the scholar turned away and looked back again, a new symbol had clarified in the margin. 3 dots, a dash, 3 dots, the pulse of arrival, pause, and return. Not a code, but a rhythm. It is said that certain words, spoken with softness, caused the ink to deepen as though hearing the syllables helped it breathe. Hidden, veiled, sacred, oceanic. Other words made it sleep. Border, conquest, claim. The scholar learned to speak only in the language the map allowed, words of breath and dusk, of echo and gate. In that calm, the paper became less like paper and more like a small shore upon which the night was washing up. The moth kept circling, spiraling lower, tracing with its body the shape of a forgotten current. One corner held a stamp so faint it seemed imagined. A circle enclosing an open eye, and within the eye, a tiny stare. A note. Another hand entirely, read, "Do not go by steps. Go by stillness." Between the rivers, tiny numerals counted 3, then 2, then 1, then the absence of number. Between the mountains, a single line suggested a pass that could only be reached by stopping. The scholar experimented and discovered an odd tenderness. Whenever the heartbeat slowed, the ink brightened just enough to outline a passage that had not been there. Whenever the eyes hurried, the passage closed. Some believe ancient sailors once used maps like this to cross seas inside themselves. Not escape, but a pilgrimage inward, an evening voyage where the constellations were remembered, not seen. Their logbooks, if they wrote any, would have recorded winds with names like mercy and return, currents called surrender. In such accounts, the shore at journey's end was described with simple words. A room with a lamp, a bowl of water, a window without glass, an old voice praying with no tongue. The map knew those rooms. It did not show the walls. It showed the breath in them. Where the vellum had darkened, a bruise of time, there lay the faint diagram of a gate without hinges. It was drawn like a letter never taught, a character from an alphabet used to write silence. Along its inner edge, small marks like fingerprints repeated, as if many hands had touched the same threshold. The scholar's own finger hesitated above it. The skin remembered a different coolness, not of stone or glass but of something like night itself, gathered and given form. It is said there were warnings, not prohibitions but blessings that asked for caution. A narrow script along the lower margin read, "When the way narrows, become breath. When the sea rises, become shore. When the name dissolves, listen. It sounded like instruction and lullaby at once. Another line, easier to miss, was written in thread-thin ink along the roll crease. Do not seek to own what guides you. The scholar, who had catalogued maps all his life with tidy labels and dates, felt a quiet unbuttoning of that habit. He set down the pen. A night came, marked by the moon late in the season, when frost touched the window and left delicate spirals, and the moth finally rested on the map's pale field. Its body warmed the vellum just where an uncharted circle had hovered for days. As the heat spread, the circle became a chamber. An empty room with a low table and no door, the window opening to a courtyard with 4 trees that were not there moments before. He could see them. He could hear a distant bell. He could smell the mineral scent of water in a basin. The map had drawn a room inside the room, a moon within the moon. The scholar did not move to enter, for there was nowhere to enter, only a deepening of attention. He breathed, and the ink breathed back. He closed his eyes, and the map did not vanish. It seemed to climb upward behind the eyes and press gently upon the mind, as a hand might rest on the brow with wordless care. In that hush, the rivers were not rivers. They were tracks of time, of childhood corridors, of steps he had taken without seeing how the dust rose. The mountains were not mountains. They were silences where he had refused to speak out of kindness and could not say why. The empty room was not empty at all. The air within it was crowded with meetings that had not yet happened and with partings that would never require grief. Whispers tell us that maps like this do not lead to treasure. They lead to the place in us that can hold treasure without closing the hand. They do not promise safety. They promise presence, the kind that moves with the tide and remains when the tide is gone. The scholar opened his eyes to the room he had known for years, and yet he felt the space had grown larger, as if a wall had remembered it was never needed. Outside, the night leaned in with gentle attention. The moth rose once more, made a small bright circle, and disappeared into the unseen. He rolled the vellum with care. The burned edge shed a grain of ash the size of a tear. He sealed the cedar tube not with wax but with breath, the old way. He did not lock the cabinet. He did not mark the shelf. He left the room by turning the lamp low and leaving a line of warm light along the floor, like a thread back to a gate. Some believe the map found another reader in time. Some say it wished for none. Perhaps it lay quietly, letting its lines fade into the pale. Perhaps the rivers thinned until they were no more than the idea of water. Perhaps the compass roses found a common north and then learned to sleep. It is said the truest maps do not grow old. They grow quiet. They wait for night to gather around them like a cloak and for a hand, marked by the moon, to arrive without hurry. In forgotten corners of the earth there are still tables cleared for such vellum, bowls of water set nearby for the air to remember the sea, lamps trained to burn low and long. There are still breaths that slow into listening until a passage appears where none had been. There are still rooms within rooms, and windows that open to courtyards that never meet the street, and bells you can only hear when you do not ask to. Where memory fades, the map is brightest. Where certainty hardens, the lines dissolve like salt. The point is not to arrive. The point is to notice the arriving, the quiet change of light, the softened name, the gentle echo that remains when the door is never opened and the journey has already begun. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it is already with us when we sit very still and let the night draw near. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some rivers only show when the hand is empty. And some maps, the kind that lead into shadow, are not for crossing distances, but for allowing distances to fold until the road, the room, the breath, and the star-marked vellum become one hushed and sacred page. It is said that there was once a city whose walls did not crumble by war, nor by fire, nor by the slow cruelty of time. Instead, it is whispered that it slipped away with moonlight itself, not destroyed, not abandoned, but veiled, as though it had only ever been a dream made solid for a while. We begin with an image. Pale stones gleaming under a midnight sky, towers casting silver shadows across wide courtyards. The air was scented with incense, drifting from doorways carved in patterns of stars. Streets of polished stone curved like rivers, their edges lit by lamps whose flames did not flicker. And at the city's heart stood a fountain, said to sing when the moon reached its fullest breath. Its waters shimmered like liquid glass, carrying the reflection of a world both seen and unseen. Some say the city was not built by human hands alone. Legends tell of craftsmen guided by voices from the sky, each brick laid to echo a constellation, each arch aligned with the rhythm of tides. To walk its avenues was to feel not only the presence of stone, but of silence woven into every surface. Children grew up hearing that the city itself was alive, that it breathed with the moon, expanding and fading with its light. But one night, as the full moon rose, something shifted. Shadows deepened, then dissolved. The courtyards grew transparent, as though their stones were woven of mist. Towers became pale silhouettes, their outlines blurring like ink touched by water. Witnesses swore they heard no collapse, no cry, only the soft sound of wind moving through an empty vessel. And when dawn came, the city was gone. In its place lay only faint traces, a scent of ash and rosewater, a dusting of white powder that glowed briefly before vanishing into the air. Travelers still seek its remnants. Some claim to see outlines when the moon is heavy, streets glimmering faintly where none should be. A wanderer walking alone might turn a corner and glimpse an open gate, its hinges shining as though freshly polished. Step closer, and the vision dissolves into shadow. Yet in those moments, the heart feels the presence of something vast, something waiting, as though the city has not vanished at all, but simply stepped behind a veil too thin to touch. Legends linger of its citizens too. Some believe they wander still, not as spirits but as shadows sewn into moonlight. They drift through their old avenues, their feet raising no dust, their words no sound. A few stories tell of travelers hearing faint footsteps behind them, or catching the scent of incense in the night where none should linger. Others speak of voices that rise like chanting when the air is very still, a language that carries no meaning yet fills the chest with reverence. Perhaps the city did not vanish, but changed. Perhaps it found refuge in the moon itself, hidden in the folds of light that move across the sky. When the moon wanes, the city sleeps. When it swells to fullness, the city breathes again, waiting for eyes gentle enough to see. The contradiction of its fate is heavy, yet calming. To know that a city might slip away not with violence but with grace, dissolving not into ruin, but into silence. Its towers were not toppled, its gates not broken. They simply faded, like breath on glass, like music remembered only in its final note. And so we are left with wonder. Was the city ever real? Did it ever stand in stone? Or was it always a reflection waiting in moonlight? Perhaps both are true. Perhaps the city lived for a time, then chose to return to the realm from which it was called. What lingers is the feeling it leaves behind. The hush of streets that no longer exist, the shimmer of fountains that no longer flow, the quiet presence of lives still unfolding somewhere just beyond reach. Perhaps the city waits still, not lost but resting, ready to appear again when the world grows silent enough to see it. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, only to remind us that even stone can dream, that even cities can breathe like the moon. And as we close our eyes, we might feel its courtyards once more beneath our feet, its towers rising in silver silence, its fountains singing to the night. The city that faded with the moonlight gone, yet not gone. A veil of mystery, soft as sleep. It is said that in a quiet quarter where ivy grows thick upon the stone, there stands a gate no one remembers building. Its arch is worn, its iron rusted, its threshold half buried in earth and shadow. At first glance, it is nothing, a ruin, a frame without a door. Yet those who pause before it feel a hush that is not ordinary silence, but the kind that gathers around sacred things. It is the silence of pages closing, of voices lowering, of secrets choosing to remain untold. We begin with an image. Moonlight spilling across the gate's curve, ivy curling in green spirals like a script written by the earth itself. A breeze moves gently through, carrying with it the faintest scent of ink, of wax, of parchment crumbled to dust. Whispers tell us that beyond this gate lies no garden of flowers, but a hidden court of scholars, men and women who defied kings, who wrote what could not be spoken, and who laid their last words in the soil rather than in the hands of power. Legends say their writings were too luminous, too dangerous, too tender to be kept in the open. And so they built no tombs, no monuments, but left only this gate, as if to remind us that knowledge, too, must sometimes be veiled. It is said the garden beyond could never be entered by force. The gate did not open with a key, nor by hand, nor by command. It opened only with silence. To step across it, one had to arrive emptied of noise, emptied of certainty, emptied even of the wish to possess. Only then, they say, the air itself would part like a page turning, and the garden would breathe open. What lay within was not shelves of books, but a different kind of archive. Stones were carved with lines that blurred between poetry and prayer. Leaves bore inscriptions invisible by day, glowing only under moonlight. Wells carried voices when one leaned too near, not echoes of water but whispers of thought. To walk there was to walk inside memory, not one's own, but the memory of the world itself, tender, unfinished, waiting. Yet those who returned from the gate spoke little. They carried no scrolls, no treasures, no maps. Only a certain quietness in their eyes, a stillness that seemed to say they had touched something unsayable. Some believed they heard a final vow in that garden, that truth is not always for the many, but for those who are willing to bear its silence. Others claimed the garden itself was alive, that each visitor left behind a breath, a prayer, a fragment of themselves, so that over centuries, it became a living manuscript of all who had passed through. Today, the gate remains, though half hidden by time. Travelers stumble upon it and pause without knowing why. They lower their voices. They step softly. They feel the weight of unseen eyes, the reverence of unseen words. The ivy shivers, and for a moment, the air is thick with listening. Yet the gate does not open. Perhaps it has chosen its last scholar. Perhaps it waits still, not for discovery, but for silence itself to return to the world. And so it lingers, a threshold that is and is not, a doorway into memory, a frame for what cannot be spoken. Perhaps the greatest knowledge is not what we read, but what remains unread, unwritten, forever withheld. Perhaps the most sacred gate is not the one that admits us, but the one that stands closed, guarding silence with silence. And in that quiet truth we rest, drifting as though into sleep, where memory fades, and what remains is only the hush of the forgotten scholars, waiting beyond the veil. It is said there once existed a book unlike any other, a ledger bound not in ordinary leather, but in something darker, smoother, a hide that gleamed faintly even in the absence of light. Its cover bore no title, no crest, no name to claim it. Only a single mark, a rose pressed into the leather so deeply it seemed to have been burned there by fire. The petals were blackened, curled, their veins etched in silver lines that caught the eye and held it in silence. Those who saw it said it was less a book than a shadow given form. We begin with an image, a chamber where the air hangs heavy with incense, a solitary candle trembling against the breath of unseen drafts. The ledger rests upon a stone table, its clasp unbroken, its presence commanding more than reverence, something nearer to unease. Dust clings to the edges, but the rose on the cover shines as though polished by unseen hands. Those who linger feel the faintest tremor in the air, as though the book itself were breathing slowly, waiting to be opened. Whispers tell us the ledger contained no accounts of coin, no lists of grain or land, but names. Each entry was said to be a single name, followed by symbols no one alive could decipher, and dates that stretched across centuries. The scholars who dared to study it spoke in hushed tones of debts recorded not in wealth but in fate. The rose, they said, was no ornament but a warning. For roses bloom with beauty, but their thorns draw blood. Legends grew around it like vines around stone. Some claimed the ledger was compiled by scribes in service to forgotten kings, chronicling alliances made in secrecy, betrayals written not in ink but in breath. Others said the ledger itself was the king, the judge, the memory that no kingdom could erase. Still others whispered it was older than kingdoms, a record begun before language itself, holding in its pages the promises that bound the living to the dead, and the dead to the living. Those who pressed their hands upon the cover described a sensation like cold water rushing through their veins. A few swore they heard faint murmurs. Not words, but tones like chanting from beneath the earth. The symbols, though unreadable, seemed to pulse with meaning, as if the eye recognized something the mind could not. The ink, some believed, was not ink at all but pressed from the petals of black roses that no longer grow. It is said that to open the ledger was to accept a vow, though one never spoken. Readers reported feeling watched, not by the book but by the names inside it. Each name carried weight, each line was heavy as stone, as though it bore not only a life but its silence, its secrets, its unfinished prayers. One scholar, trembling, wrote in his diary that the ledger was not written by hands but by time itself, that the rose upon its cover was the flower of eternity, fed not by soil but by memory. The ledger did not move. It did not vanish. It simply remained, silent yet commanding, its clasp refusing most who tried to open it. Yet stories tell of a few who succeeded. One monk, it is said, opened the book during a midnight vigil. The candlelight dimmed, and though he turned no pages, the room filled with the scent of roses, sharp and overwhelming. In the morning, the ledger was closed once more, and the monk was found asleep at the table, a faint black stain on his fingertips, as if he had touched ash. He awoke but spoke no more of what he saw. Some believed the ledger carried not curses but mercy, that it held the memory of promises too fragile to survive elsewhere, keeping them alive when the world had forgotten. Others believed it dangerous, for what is mercy in one hand may be burden in another. Perhaps the truth lies in neither belief but in silence itself. The ledger does not explain. It only waits. The paradox is clear. To open it is to be marked by it, yet to leave it unopened is to live in its shadow. It asks nothing, yet it demands everything. It sits as though eternal, its rose forever pressed against the veil of time. And so it lingers, a book no one dares to destroy, a record no one dares to read aloud. Dust gathers upon its table, candles burn low around it, and yet the rose shines, always as though freshly sealed. Travelers who enter the chamber find themselves whispering without intent, their voices lowered by the weight of what rests there. The silence is not emptiness. It is presence, vast and unbroken. Perhaps the ledger was never meant to be understood. Perhaps its purpose is not to reveal but to remind. A rose blooms only for a time, but the ledger of the black rose blooms forever, holding in its pages a garden of names too heavy for memory alone. We are left with wonder. Does it bind lives together still? Does it keep watch over debts that no crown can repay? Or does it simply sit, waiting for silence, feeding on the reverence of those who dare to stand before it? Perhaps the greatest books are not the ones we read, but the ones that remain unread, sealed by time's gentle cruelty. And perhaps the ledger of the black rose is not a record at all, but a mirror, showing us that what we fear most is not forgetting, but remembering too much. In the end, we close our eyes. The candle burns lower. The rose glimmers faintly in the dark. And in that hush we drift, knowing the ledger remains unopened, yet always waiting, forever whispering through silence. It is said that in the cloister of a forgotten monastery, where stone corridors bend like prayers and ivy clings to crumbling walls, there lies a well whose waters no longer rise. Its rim is smooth, worn by countless hands that once leaned upon it in reverence. Cracks run along its circle like veins of age, and moss creeps into the crevices as if keeping vigil. At first, it seems ordinary, a ruin of a vessel long since abandoned. Yet those who linger near it feel the weight of a silence unlike any other, a silence that does not fall upon the well, but rises from it. We begin with an image, moonlight pouring into its hollow, a pale beam swallowed by depths that reveal nothing. No reflection, no shimmer, no echo of stone. Only darkness, soft and infinite, as though time itself had found a place to rest. Monks once whispered that the well was not for water but for memory, a mirror where centuries folded upon themselves. They leaned close and swore they heard voices not their own, faint and fluid, like chants drifting through corridors of air. It is said that gazing into the well was not unlike falling asleep. At first, the eyes saw nothing but shadow. Then slowly, shapes began to form. Not visions of places, but of moments. A hand releasing a candle flame. A child's laughter carried by wind. The tremor of an old voice repeating a prayer long forgotten. Time, they said, pooled here as water does, flowing in but never flowing out. Legends tell of pilgrims who traveled great distances only to kneel at its edge. Some left with faces pale and eyes wide, unable to speak for days. Others leaned too far and were never seen again, not taken by water but by silence. It was believed that the well held no bottom, or perhaps too many. To look into it was to dissolve one's place in the world, to slip between the folds of hours, leaving behind the certainty of clocks. The monks, guardians of its mystery, never drew from it with rope or bucket. They treated it not as a source, but as a shrine. At dusk, when bells rang low, they circled the well in silence, each bowing before its rim as though before a master. Some say they placed small objects on the stone, a feather, a coin, a sprig of rosemary, tokens meant not to be offered but to be remembered. By morning, the objects were gone, though no hand had taken them. Perhaps the well was not an opening into the earth, but into something greater. Some believed it was the throat of time itself, where moments gathered like drops of rain. Others whispered that it was the memory of the world, that the well drank not water, but hours, days, lives. To look into it was to feel the weight of all that had ever been, condensed into one infinite breath. And yet there was peace there. Pilgrims who dared to sit in its presence spoke of a stillness that wrapped around them like a cloak. Their hearts slowed, their minds softened, their bodies grew light. They felt as though they were dissolving into something vast and benevolent, a tide that asked nothing but surrender. The well was not cruel. It did not pull. It only held. As centuries passed, the monastery itself faded. Roofs collapsed, walls crumbled, bells fell silent. But the well remained, untouched by ruin. Its rim still smooth, its depth still dark, its silence still whole. Travelers who stumble upon it today often find themselves whispering without knowing why. Some lean close and hear a faint hum, like breath beneath the earth. Others swear they see a flicker, a ripple in the dark, as though something just moved far below. The paradox lingers. If the well is empty, how does it hold so much? If it is full, what is it full of? Perhaps time itself found it too heavy to carry, and so laid it here to sleep. And so it rests, a vessel for what cannot be measured, a shrine to what cannot be kept. No rope can reach it, no bucket can hold it. Its silence remains, vast and unbroken, drawing us not to drink, but to remember. Perhaps the well where time slept was never meant to be understood. Perhaps it was never meant to quench thirst, but to remind us of another kind of hunger, the hunger to pause, to let go, to listen to the sound of silence holding all things. And as we close our eyes beside it, the darkness rises, gentle and unhurried, like water filling the soul. Time drifts away, not lost, not gone, but resting, waiting in the hush of the well. It is said that in the valley of slow winds, there once stood a cloister where bells rang not for time, nor for warning, nor for celebration, but for silence itself. The towers rose modestly, their arches open to the sky, their stones soft with age. From afar, travelers would see their silhouettes against the dusk and hear a music unlike any other. Deep, resonant tones that seemed less to sound than to breathe. But now the cloister is still. Its bells remain, suspended in their towers, tarnished and cracked, heavy with centuries. They no longer move, no longer sing. And yet, to stand beneath them is to feel a hush so vast it seems the air itself remembers. We begin with an image. Moonlight spilling across the cloister's courtyard, its flagstones fractured, its fountains long dry. Ivy crawls along the walls, weaving green prayers across forgotten arches. The bells hang above, immense and unmoving, their bronze darkened, their lips split by time, At first, they appear broken, useless, abandoned. Yet linger and a different truth arises. The silence here is not absence. It is presence, thick as incense, enfolding everything in reverence. The bells do not need to strike. Their stillness is its own unending toll. Legends whisper that these bells were forged not by blacksmiths alone, but by monks who poured chants into molten bronze. Each hammer stroke was said to carry a prayer, each curve aligned with celestial order. The bells, they believed, could carry not sound but burdens, drawing away grief, releasing unspoken confessions into the open air. To stand beneath their peal was to be lightened, as though one's silence had been shared. But one evening, without warning, the bells ceased. No cord snapped, no tower crumbled. They simply fell into quiet. The monks gathered, expecting the silence to lift, but it lingered. Days turned to years, years to centuries, and the bells never rang again. Yet the cloister did not lose its sanctity. Pilgrims still came, kneeling in the courtyard, listening not for sound but for what remained when sound was gone. It is said that those who stay long enough still hear them, not with the ears but with the body. A vibration in the chest, a low hum in the bones, as though the bells are ringing within, drawing out words unspoken. Travelers describe a sudden lightness, tears that rise without cause, laughter without memory. The bells remain still, yet their silence carries the resonance of 1,000 tones. Some scholars once claimed the cloister was built upon a fault in time itself, that the bells were placed not to mark hours but to balance the world's hidden rhythms. When they rang, the earth's breath was steady. When they fell silent, balance shifted inward, asking humans to remember what the earth could no longer carry alone. Others whispered that the bells did not cease at all, that their sound became too vast, too sacred, too infinite for ears, and so it continues, unheard yet always present. Now, ivy thickens over the stone, birds nest in the arches, and moss climbs across the flagstones. The towers lean, but the bells hold firm, immovable, heavy with silence. At dusk, when shadows grow long, the air in the cloister deepens. Even wind passes softly, as if bowing to something greater. Pilgrims lower their voices without knowing why. Children grow still, listening to something their elders cannot name. The silence is not empty. It is a choir vast and unseen. Perhaps the bells of this cloister were never meant to be heard forever. Perhaps their task was to teach us that silence, too, can sing. That in the absence of sound lies the deepest resonance. That what lingers after music fades is not void, but presence. And so the cloister rests, its bells unmoving, its courtyards overgrown, its arches open to the stars. No hand rings them, no wind stirs them. Yet their silence tolls endlessly across the night, a music that cannot be broken, a hymn that waits in stillness. We leave with no conclusion, only the soft echo of what cannot be heard. Perhaps the cloister of forgotten bells has never truly fallen silent. Perhaps its tones continue, woven now into the breath of those who pause, into the dreams of those who sleep. And in that thought we drift, carried not by ringing, but by the silence that follows, deep as eternity. It is said that beneath a river of silver light, a river that runs smooth as breath beneath the moon, there drift lanterns that never go out. Their glow is faint, almost hidden, a shimmer caught beneath ripples where no flame should survive. To gaze upon them is to wonder whether they are truly there, or whether the river itself has learned to remember light. We begin with an image. Night falling soft upon the banks, the air cool with the scent of reeds and water. The surface of the river mirrors the stars, each ripple bending constellations into trembling lines. Then, just beneath, a glimmer. At first it looks like reflection, the moon's light tangled in current. But the longer one looks, the clearer it becomes. Lanterns, hundreds of them, glowing gently in the dark flow. Their shapes blur like memories half remembered, drifting without end. Whispers tell us they were once set afloat by monks long vanished, as part of a ceremony few understood. Each lantern, carved of paper and wood, carried a single prayer, a confession, a farewell, a hope. They were lit not to guide the living, but to honor the forgotten, those whose names no one carried any longer. The monks lowered them to the current, expecting the flames to die as all flames do. Yet the river did not extinguish them. It swallowed the lanterns whole, but their glow remained. Some say the lanterns sank and settled into the riverbed, resting like a constellation beneath water. Others believe they move still, following a current invisible to the surface, circling endlessly through hidden chambers. Whatever their fate, their light endures. Travelers who walk the banks at night tell of glimpses. A sudden golden shimmer beneath the waves, a glow that bends with the current but never fades. Legends linger that the lanterns were more than prayer. Some believe they were vessels of memory, each carrying the breath of a soul, a single voice folded into flame. To release one was to entrust silence to the river itself, to let the waters carry what the heart could not. It is said that those who watched the lanterns float away felt lighter, as though their burdens had dissolved into the current. And yet, centuries later, the lanterns drift below, their glow refusing to vanish. Pilgrims who kneel at the banks sometimes claim to hear faint murmurs rising from the water. Not language, but a hum, soft, oceanic, like the chorus of many voices blended into one. Others describe visions in the glow. A face long gone, a moment thought forgotten, a fragment of childhood laughter rising like mist. The river seems to carry not only lanterns, but the very memory of those who once set them free. There are tales of wanderers who tried to grasp one. They leaned over the current, reached their hand into the glow, and felt not wood or paper, but warmth itself, as though touching the ember of a dream. When they drew back, their hand was wet, yet faintly luminous, glowing as if marked by what lies beneath. By morning, the glow would fade, but the feeling lingered. A strange peace, a soft reminder of something both lost and present. Scholars once tried to explain it. They spoke of gases, of minerals, of tricks of reflection. Yet their words fell thin against the testimony of countless travelers, against the deep hush of the river itself. For what science cannot hold, silence remembers. And silence, too, has its lanterns. Now the banks are quiet. Trees lean close, their roots drinking from the current, their branches bending like arms of witness. Birds settle in the reeds, their songs hushed by night. And still, beneath the surface, the lanterns drift, carrying light without end. Perhaps they remain because the prayers they carried were never answered, and so the river keeps them safe until the world is ready to listen. Perhaps they remain because the river itself chose to remember what humans too easily forget. Or perhaps they are not lanterns at all, but the river's own dream, a reflection of light it once saw and refused to let go. The paradox lingers. They are there and not there, seen yet unseen, real yet remembered. To look upon them is to feel both wonder and longing, a recognition of something just beyond reach. And so the river flows, silver beneath the moon, carrying its hidden constellation. The lanterns drift in silence, their glow unchanged by centuries, their prayers folded deep into current. They ask nothing, they promise nothing. They simply shine, softly, beneath the flow of time. Perhaps the greatest lights are not those we see above us, but those hidden beneath, waiting in silence. Perhaps memory itself glows like these lanterns, submerged, unseen, yet always alive beneath the surface of things. And as we close our eyes, we feel the hush of the river, the gentle glow beneath. The lanterns drift on, carrying what words cannot. A light beneath the water, eternal as sleep. It is said that in a forgotten land of cliffs and winds, there lies a staircase carved into stone, rising upward into nothing. Its steps are worn, their edges softened by centuries of bare feet, yet they do not end where one expects. They climb higher and higher, past ledges and ridges, until they dissolve into mist, leaving the pilgrim suspended between earth and sky. Those who have stood at its base speak of a pull that is not of the body but of the heart, a calling upward into silence. We begin with an image. Dawn breaking pale against the cliff, the staircase revealed in amber light. The first steps are wide, their grooves deep, filled with moss that drinks the morning dew. Higher, the steps grow narrow, edges crumbling, their surfaces chipped by time. Along the wall, faint carvings emerge, spirals, stars, and names long forgotten, etched by hands that carried no tools but the desire to be remembered. The air grows thinner as one ascends, and with it grows the hush, as though each step takes the traveler further not only from the ground but from sound itself. Legends whisper that the staircase was once a path to a temple in the clouds. The temple has vanished, leaving only its ascent. Some say it was never built to reach stone at all, but to teach the pilgrim that the act of climbing, of rising step by step, was the temple itself. Others claim the staircase was carved by monks who believed silence dwelled at the height of air, where voices cannot reach, and so they carved a path to meet it. Those who climb describe a strange transformation. The further they rise, the less the world below matters. Villages shrink to dust, rivers to thin silver lines, forests to shadows on the land. The body tires, but the mind softens. Some report hearing faint chanting, though no monks remain. Others say they feel the presence of unseen travelers beside them, walking at the same pace, silent companions of breath. It is said that the staircase does not end in mist alone. Those who reach its last visible step often describe a moment of stillness, as if the stone beneath them has vanished. There is no fall, no fear, only a sense of being held in air itself. A hush so deep it feels eternal, as though silence has drawn them into its heart. When they step back, the staircase remains the same, but the climber is changed, carrying a quietness that lingers long after descent. The paradox of the staircase is clear. Climbs toward nothing, yet toward everything. It ends without ending. Its purpose lies not in arrival, but in the journey of silence it awakens within those who walk it. Travelers who find it today approach with reverence. They place their hands upon the first step and feel the cool stone breathe beneath their palm. They ascend slowly, their footsteps soft, their voices hushed. Some turn back after only a few steps, unable to bear the weight of its silence. Others climb higher, pausing often, not to rest the body but to rest the mind. Each pause becomes a prayer, each breath a chant. At dusk, when the sun folds into the horizon, the staircase glows faintly in the last light, each step seeming to float in air. The mist rises, veiling its upper reaches, and the cliff becomes a threshold between worlds. The wind passes gently through, carrying with it the scent of stone, the taste of distance, the echo of steps never completed. Perhaps the staircase was never meant to lead to a temple, but to remind us that silence itself is sacred ground. Perhaps it was carved not to reach heaven, but to show that heaven can be found in ascent, in breath, in stillness. And so the staircase remains, weathered and unfinished, climbing endlessly into silence. It does not demand to be conquered, only to be walked, one step, one pause, one breath at a time. We leave not with answers, but with wonder. Perhaps the staircase does not end in mist. Perhaps it continues, unseen, into the silence we carry within. And as we close our eyes, we too climb, not toward stone, not toward sky, but toward stillness. Step by step, breath by breath, into the hush that waits beyond all endings. It is said that once, in the vast dome of night, there shimmered a constellation now erased from memory. Its stars were traced by sages with fingers dipped in silence, its shape marked across tablets of stone, its meaning whispered in the stillness of observatories where oil lamps flickered low. And yet, over centuries, it faded, not vanished from the sky, for the stars themselves still burn, but vanished from remembrance. Its pattern was dissolved, its name left unspoken, its story folded into shadow. We begin with an image, a desert plain under midnight. The air is cool, the sand pale as bone. Above, the heavens stretch wide, each star trembling like breath upon water. Yet in one corner of the sky, there is absence. The stars shine, but they do not gather into form. The traveler gazes upward, waiting for the familiar patterns. The hunter, the serpent, the ship, but finds only scatter, silence, a veil where a story once lived. It is here, whispers say, that the forgotten constellation lingers, erased but not gone. Legends tell of its shape. Some described it as a bird, wings wide, guiding lost sailors across seas before maps. Others said it was a gate, a threshold written in starlight, a passage to dreams. Still others believed it was no form at all, but a word, a single syllable of the language the universe once spoke before human tongues were born. To trace it in the sky was to call upon truths too immense for time. And so, it was erased, gently, deliberately, as though silence itself covered it with a veil. Ancient observatories still carry traces. Stones carved in circles align with stars that no longer match. In one ruined temple, a ceiling fresco shows figures pointing upward to a pattern that now seems senseless. Yet their faces glow with awe, as if beholding something vast. Scholars have tried to reconstruct it, joining dots across the night, but each attempt dissolves, like a map drawn on water. The constellation resists being named again. It is said the constellation could be seen not with the eyes alone, but with stillness. When one sat long enough beneath the stars, letting thought dissolve, the pattern revealed itself, not above, but within. A gathering of lights behind the eyelids, a geometry of presence, an echo of a shape both familiar and unknowable. It was not lost to the sky, it was lost to our gaze. Travelers speak of moments when the veil lifts. A shepherd lying in fields, staring upward after a long day, suddenly sees a curve of stars align into a wing. A sailor adrift, gazing into the endless dark, catches the outline of a doorway in the sky. They blink, and the vision is gone, leaving only longing. Yet the memory of it lingers, sweet as incense, fragile as breath. Perhaps the constellation was hidden because it carried more than beauty. Perhaps it carried memory too deep for the waking world. A story not of heroes or battles, but of silence itself. To name it was to disturb it. To forget it was to let it remain pure. And so the sky, with quiet mercy, covered it with absence, like a veil over a sacred face. Now, when the night is clear and the heart is still, one might sense it again, not in lines of light but in the spaces between. For the veil is not emptiness. It is presence concealed. The stars are not silent. They are waiting, as they always have, for the eye that does not seek, but listens. The paradox holds us gently. The constellation is gone, and yet it remains. Its name is lost, and yet it whispers in silence. Its form is erased, and yet it lives in the spaces we cannot map. And so we are left with wonder. Perhaps some truths are not meant to be remembered with clarity, but with reverence. Perhaps the forgotten constellation is not forgotten at all, but hidden, waiting for those who approach with the stillness of sleep. As we close our eyes, the sky remains above us, vast and veiled. The stars shimmer, and in the hush between them, we sense it. A shape, a word, a presence just beyond reach. The veil of the forgotten constellation, gone yet not gone, hidden, yet always shining, forever waiting in the silence of night. It is said that all stories return to silence, and all silence returns to story. Beneath the marble hush of forgotten halls, there lingers still that library whose shelves were not meant for the living alone. We began here with its ashen bindings and crumbled scrolls, and we return here now, to close, not with certainty, but with wonder. The air moves gently as though stirred by invisible footsteps. Shadows lean across stone, and in their folds one might almost glimpse a figure. A scholar bending low, a candle flickering against ink that no longer breathes. The shelves remain heavy with dust, yet the dust itself feels sacred, as if each grain once bore a word too fragile to survive. It is said that beneath this visible library lies another, deeper, where forbidden pages sleep. We wandered its corridors, touched bindings that dissolved beneath our hands, tasted the breath of 1,000 forgotten prayers. And now, standing again at its threshold, we sense the truth, that the greatest book is not the one read, nor the one written, but the one that remains sealed. Perhaps the words were too luminous, too infinite, too dangerous for the world above. Perhaps they were meant only to be dreamt of, never spoken. In their silence, they have become eternal, untouched by time's cruelty. We leave not with knowledge, but with stillness. Not with answers, but with presence. The whisper of ashen pages drifts softly in the air, not urging us to open, but to listen, to the silence between words, to the breath between thoughts, to the hush that holds us as night folds gently around. And so the cycle closes. The gates, the wells, the bells, the lanterns, the staircase, the constellation, each a chapter of silence, each a reminder that mystery does not demand resolution, only reverence. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Perhaps the most sacred truth is not the word, but the silence that carries it. The candle burns low, the halls grow still, and the pages, unread, remain eternal. We drift into that silence now, as into sleep, carrying with us not the weight of answers, but the lightness of wonder. The whisper lingers, the night holds it, and so we rest,